Thanks everyone for coming. My name's Nick Sommerfeld. Today we'll be talking about product and project harmony, so ITSM best practices to accelerate teamwork and growth. So my name, like I said, Nick Sommerfeld. I'm a strategic account manager with ISO's Technology.
And I'm Kevin Rigard, Director of Marketing Technologies for Crocs.
Awesome. All right, so just a little bit about ISO's Technology. So we just recently won 2022 Partner of the Year for ITSM. We've won it a handful of times, 3 or 4 times, I think. Shameless marketing plug. So thanks for joining. Kevin, I think everyone knows, but do you want to give a little bit about Crocs?
Sure. A retail footwear company recently purchased also a shoe company called Hey Dude. So I work on our enterprise team. Yes, we sell lots of plastic shoes.
Cool. And I have Chucks. You have Crocs.
I have Crocs.
Of course, we did not get the ISO's Crocs this year. Awesome. So we're here to talk about some challenges with tool administration. There are a lot of issues that could arise as you start to develop your Atlassian stack. Mostly from a cleanliness perspective. So do you want to give us a little bit about those challenges?
Yeah, so when I started at Crocs, we had just brought in Jira for some basic use. And we'd gone through a long setup, probably about a year, and those admins eventually left the company. And so it kind of came to a point where we needed to start making changes. Our teams were growing, more teams wanted to use Jira. We really kind of fell into this trap of not knowing how our instance was set up. The biggest thing was we had all these JSM intakes and they would break, or we needed a new form, didn't know how to do it. And we really came to this point where we needed to understand how to grow and how to use the tool.
Yeah, and not all too uncommon, right? With any technology stack or any specific point solution, a lot of times there's a single point of failure or too many cooks in the kitchen, right?
Yep.
Both are big problems. Awesome. So can you give us a little bit about how the Atlassian stack is used within your organization and then your team specifically or department?
Sure. So like I said, it's a corporate tool, so we use it across the organization in various different ways. We have our IT team that uses it to help on tickets, but we also have everything from business teams to our digital commerce group, which I'm a part of, that use it in different areas. We all need to be able to get into it, but some teams are using it more for their entire top to bottom process, and others are just jumping in where needed.
Sure, and it depends on the department, right? The marketing may be a little less entrenched. They've got other tools out there. From your perspective, you guys are the heaviest users of the Atlassian stack, right?
Correct. Yeah, our digital commerce team, we do everything from product development and DevOps to business planning and really going, forward with those team goals. So we're pretty much more entrenched in it. We have a couple of teams still using Trello, but we're slowly bringing them over to Jira as well.
Awesome. So like we mentioned, those tooling challenges, can you talk about the tooling that you guys are using? And I know we touched on admins leaving or, too many cooks in the kitchen from an admin perspective. Can you go a little deeper into Jira, Trello, and some of the other tools you're using, how that all works together?
Sure. Yeah. Our biggest delivery group is our DevOps, and they were 100% in Jira. And then we had marketing teams or product teams like myself in Trello. And then we have other tools that just kind of connect, Adobe Workfront and some other small tools that we've utilized throughout the group. And so as we started to grow the delivery team, we started to unify up to Jira. So you can kind of see on the slide, we have multiple things, but we're all leaning towards that Jira side and really using the DevOps group and the delivery team as the model of how we want to build it so that we can then move on to other teams.
Great. Yeah, and so our engagement initially started from an audit and cleanup perspective. I think it was, like you mentioned, the recognition that you didn't have the expertise, or you had lost the expertise through losing your admins, right? And there were too many hands in that admin pot. So we started from an audit and cleanup perspective, quickly realized that there wasn't a lot of alignment on the team side, right? And
Right.
Also organizationally on the direction with the Atlassian stack. So can you tell everyone how you got to us, what the goals were, and then how that all went?
Sure. Yeah, we kind of, again, we're being asked to get into Jira more, have more teams be unified in our process. So we really jumped in and said, yeah, we want to do this, but quickly found out that the tool or our previous setup was a bit more complex than we had anticipated. So we were kind of the squeaky wheel that got the grease and kept asking for help, whether that was an internal admin or just more training. And our VP level kind of came to us and said, hey, we found this partner, you know, use them to help you guys get up to speed and keep moving forward. So that was a really big relief for us that we were going to have some expertise in the Atlassian suite, be able to fix our JSM intakes for the first thing I wanted to do, but really how do we move that and grow that throughout the whole team?
Yeah, because a lot of the focus was on the Jira software side of the house, right? But the way that you guys operated was taking tickets in from a Jira service management perspective, right?
Yep.
So a lot of linking, a lot of creating a ticket through the portal, it getting pushed into Jira software, into a backlog for the development teams to work. But all of the intakes were separate. Everyone was created sort of in a silo. So there were a lot of different custom fields, statuses, just a lot of different processes, right? Awesome. And there were 20 teams we decided we wanted to talk to at the beginning?
Yeah, so this was something that was really eye-opening as we started to work with ISOs of the terminology or the names of things, right? We'd have team, and a team thought they worked on a board, but it was really a project. They wanted something new, so we built a new project, and we really just should have built a board. So it was really this like nomenclature that we had to get out of ourselves to really understand how do we want our work. But yeah, we had identified, we called them teams, but they were really just groups of work that needed to be done. And we were trying to figure out how do we keep our teammates from having to go from project to project to actually just be able to deliver more work.
Sure. And a lot of the audit and cleanup is determining why things are being done the way that they're being done, right? So I had a lot of questions. There weren't necessarily a lot of great answers, or at least unified answers, right? So we paused that. We took a step back. We didn't talk for a little while. You had a lot of conversations to have internally. So can you tell everyone how that went, your conversations internally, and why you wanted to look towards a unified, operational process within Jira, and then some of that agile, your flavor of that, Crocs flavor of agile at the moment?
Yeah, I think you had started with our teams and trying to do this discovery around audit on what everybody wanted and what everybody needed. And shortly we found out that there was no commonality. So we kind of had to take a pause, and we had already had some internal discussions about needing to move more towards an agile process. And so we thought we could parallel path the tooling and the training, and quickly kind of found out that that wasn't the right move for us. So like Nick said, we kind of stopped for a while, went through kind of our agile coaching, and really got our team to start thinking about how we wanted to do more work together. And those really unlocked some of these ideas around the unified structure on how we could use less projects and focus on teams that did similar types of work, and then build the tooling around that process.
Right. Great point. So we could have absolutely built the tool to form to your process, but it wouldn't have been great. We would have ran into the exact same issues that we set out to clean up, or we could have just cleaned everything up, trimmed statuses, trimmed custom fields, consolidated projects. But without this, we would have been in that same place 18 months later, right?
Easily, yeah.
Awesome. So it really first started with training. So one of the great things that was identified by Crocs initially was we don't know a lot about using the tool from an admin perspective and even from a user perspective. So like you mentioned, I think I would ask folks about their project, and they always equated that to a board, where they're not the same thing. So this helped. So can you tell everyone what drove you guys to take some of the training, and how did that help?
Yeah, so like I had mentioned, we were going on this agile transformation journey anyways. And so we had moved not long before this to a product team model and having project managers or scrum masters. And that was different than when we originally set up our Jira instance too. So we wanted that core group to really be the ones that owned a lot of the knowledge around the tooling. So they could be taking their agile coaching lessons at the same time as understanding how that might look in Jira, whether it's from an intake to admins, and then obviously doing all the work in the software. So these are kind of the 4 classes we focused on. And a lot more users just do essentials just to understand the basics of issue types and how work should flow. But then our PO and PM groups really focusing on the admin and the JSM side.
Right, and a lot of the bloat, as it were, inside your instance was projects, right?
Yep.
And so any sort of new thing that someone needed to work on, they would ask for a new project. And when you have 6 to 10 admins who are more or less self-taught without any formal training, it's okay, let's create a new project for you, right? But you don't really need that, not every time anyway. So you guys took away, consolidated, how you wanted to run things in Jira, go through the training. Now we could start the cleanup, triage the items, clean up the items, audit the entire instance, and make progress. So the first thing we're going to talk about here from an audit and cleanup perspective in this slide, or some of this might be super familiar. I would be surprised if there's someone in this room that hasn't seen this in their own environment in some form. A 10 to 15 status workflow with all transitions, and it's chaos. No one knows what's next. Your teams may not all be working the same. So someone might go from ready for QA to deploy, because that's always great. Or, right from to do to deploy. It allows it, right? So can you tell us a little bit about how we got here, how it was recognized that this was an issue, and how, did it work well for the teams actually?
Yeah, I mean, I think how we got here was good intent, right? We had lost some knowledge, so we had a lot of admins come in, and we really just wanted to keep our teams working. So somebody would say, why can't my ticket go from in progress to deployed? And we would just have people make those changes and allow the team to just do more work, which, made sense for the time when we were trying to speed up and we had big growth as a company. But looking back on it, this created a lot of confusion, right? We didn't understand why tickets were going through what stages. We had a lot of similar statuses. This probably doesn't even represent probably the worst workflow we might have found, but a lot of duplication and really no reason why other than teams had asked for it. We solved their need at that moment and then just moved on with work. So it was in good intent of trying to get more done, but we really weren't scaling to support where we wanted to be as a team.
Yeah, and to bring it back to the ITSM or the JSM portion of this, all of this data from a workflow perspective, those tickets were created off of intake tickets, right? So through automation, a backlog, an item would be placed in the backlog, and it would have to go through this workflow, right?
Yeah.
But from a JSM perspective, we also got into the place with custom field chaos, where fields were created for the portal specifically to intake. And because they were done in silo, we had a lot of duplication, right? So what are we looking at here?
So like you had mentioned, we had, projects were something that we duplicated very often, as we did with JSM projects. So if we needed to spin up something new, we wanted to do an intake, put this work in the project to do it in software. We were not really diligent on going back and going, does this exist somewhere else? Or how can we modify an existing intake? And so, when we're a global company, we run 12 different country sites. So region is very important for what we do for work. And as you can see, everybody's flavor of region existed. So this made it really difficult, one, to understand where the work was being done for certain regions, but also just getting a clear understanding. People use different abbreviations for North America, and people might have mistyped a character that we couldn't figure out what it was. So different field types, different names, no commonalities. And again, was really meant to go to speed, but it wasn't really helping us together to understand where all of our work was being done.
Sure. Mistype is probably nice. Most people can't spell. So, in text fields are just, you can't audit them. You can't report on them in any meaningful way. You have to account for so many variations in people's inability to spell. I mean, I can't spell definitely. I have to autocorrect it every time. So, but also back to the workflow piece, what I was shocked to see is there was only one canceled. You guys didn't have the double L canceled, which was actually pretty shocking.
We probably had it in some boards.
Maybe
right?
somewhere. Yeah. Awesome. So and when you talked about projects, the duplication of projects, not even only from a Jira software perspective, or maybe the quickness to spin up a new project. Yeah. So if you needed a new intake, for you guys, that meant a new project as opposed to just a new request type within an
Correct.
existing project, right?
Yes, and then we were trying to triage across multiple projects, and that became a really tough issue, right? Of trying to understand how much work is coming in when we've got a different JSM tied to a specific software project, only for the fact that we knew not how to do it better.
Right. Okay, so again, a lot of cleanup, a lot of stuff around workflows and statuses and custom fields. Can you tell everyone how we actually got to this? Because this is not easy to get to. It takes a lot of conversation internally. So how did that go?
Yeah, I think since we built this slide, our project number is even less, which is great. We just keep thinking about how to consolidate. And I think a lot of that came from the agile training and really understanding the tool of the project represents where a team does work. The project isn't a thing, it isn't a grouping of work. And so as we went through that and understood it in our own operating model, we started to see how that made a change in the tooling. The fields and statuses were a bit more tricky. We had a lot of debate and conversation on fields that people like to use. And really, we had done some conversations earlier, but really the thought was I'm going to show them everything. I don't think anybody realized that we had 200 plus fields. And I would ask a team, do you really need all these? I let them kind of rank choice them, put them on a spreadsheet for very basic things. And we ended up coming down to a lot of commonalities across the teams. And then I took a second swing and we went back and I said, okay, you've told me you like all of these fields. Let's argue about, are these duplicate, or would one team be willing to give up, deployed just to be done on a status? And it really took some time, but we didn't try to tackle it all at once. And I think that was a really important piece of, let's talk about something very specific, walk away from it, come back and kind of tackle all of these nuances of the setup and the scheming that really caused us the problems. And I think the team was much more willing to get down to this common core. And then we've done some build up after that of some custom fields and some statuses that certain projects really need for their use case. But we at least started with a common core.
Yeah, and it's an iterative build, right? So like you mentioned, start at the project, start at that consolidation level, maybe get some workflow commonality in place, and we'll eventually start making more and more changes. They give them some unique features within their project, right? But keeps it consistent across the instance. Awesome. So there's a little bit of reimagining of Jira software and JSM, Jira Service Management. Things are working a little different now than they did, right? So like I mentioned, there were, 6 or 7 different JSM projects, all with mostly one request type in them. So that's all been consolidated into one project, right? So anyone who's doing triage, they have one project to go to, and maybe various queues denoting the request type. Can you tell everyone how and why the JSM to Jira software connection works for you guys specifically?
Yeah, I think it works a lot for us because, we're not 100% development focused. We have a lot of business requests, some ideas, and really the business teams that are bringing that work to our DevOps group need somewhere where they can input. They're not going to be in Jira every day. They're not going to understand why it's important that we have all of these fields and everything found out. So creating an intake portal through JSM that made sense to them, but also that we could, gain efficiencies on the back was very important to us. Also, we wanted to be able to scale. We knew that there's common types of requests that happen every day. Instead of them going through kind of a generic intake or project submit, we'd say, if you know what this is very specifically to, give us those specific requests and requirements, then we can easily route that work. There's a lot of things in our original setup where we had multiple JSM intakes to multiple projects would get lost. And we'd have teams going, I submitted that 4 months ago, where is it at? We'd look at each other and go, I don't know, do you know? And it really came down to that of needing to scale the request type, but be able to handle it with much more speed and efficiency than we had before.
Yeah, and a lot of the reimagining maybe isn't reimagining, it's re-implementing best practices, right?
Yeah.
So I know when I joined your instance, I'm a pretty good Jira admin, but when I got in your environment, I was made an org admin and I had access to no projects, right? So the permission scheme at its core level was flawed in the way it was done, right? I think you'd created a custom role called project manager, but then there's our project administrator or something like that, and sort of wiped out the internal project administrator from a role permission that Jira, obviously provides for you. So it was very way to unravel all of that, right? Way to unravel a whole bunch of other things. So access, permissioning, the forms, right? So a lot of the forms were, well, what, in your opinion, how were the forms before versus after?
So our forms were, again, like we said, this is a major business user request form. So they were tailored to them, but we had never really thought about, well, where does that data go? There were several times where we ask all these questions and fill out a form and then, write an automation and say, clone to software project. And then nothing would show up because none of those fields actually lived on the screens that powered the software projects. So we had made them, again, focusing more on the business user because we just needed intake, versus having Teams and emails and everything flood our day. But we weren't really thinking about how should we properly set this up.
Yeah.
So we're now, using similar type fields, even if they have to have a different context, it's the same field. So that when somebody says, I need this for US and Canada, it's mapped the same, it's reportable, and we're not, creating new things each time.
Yeah, and on the forms, right? Due date may be the basis of every form, but it's called something different on each form, right? From a presenting it on the portal standpoint, but then mapping to the due date field specifically, right? So you can present it in a different way, maybe solicit a slightly different piece of information. Some of the forms were also pretty lengthy, right? And all required fields, which if you need the field, you need the field. But I know if I go to a form and it's 10 to 15 fields and they're all required, I will bail and send a Slack message, right? So was that like during the process of before we audited, were the form submissions that helpful? Was there always a lot of back and forth, or how did the form submissions work back then?
Yeah, I mean, we had kind of both sides of it. We had really long forms with all required fields, and we'd have some medium forms that had no required fields. So we were spending a lot of time in the triage stage of trying to understand, what to do with that ticket, what to do with that request. We are now kind of taking the approach of, instead of having the PO, PM group or the actual delivery team build the form, we're asking the business to kind of guide us on what are the questions that you can answer for us. And then we kind of decide how we can map that on the backside so that, again, we know more about the work. We can get it into the queues faster, get it to the teams that are actually going to do the development.
Right, because from a best practice standpoint and based on the way you're using it, you're pushing form submissions into your backlog, right, for the development teams to work on. There is a minimum amount of data that they need to actually begin work, or then once a ticket's submitted, you just waste your time back and forth asking questions until you get to the point that you should have gotten to right at the beginning when the form was submitted, right? Yeah. Awesome. So we've talked a lot about all these things, the audit, the cleanup, the process, the conversations. Can you give us a bit about where Crocs is today? We're full transparency, we're still doing some of these things, right? Not 100% of everything we've talked about has launched. But can you tell everyone where we're at today, what's some of the next steps are?
Yeah, where we're at today is we've gone through all of these audit exercises. We've had the conversations with the team. We're in agreement on how to do the work and how to build it. There's still a lot to finish building and kind of launch. Final stage of like mapping tickets over and recreating boards is still yet to come. But now we're at this point where when something needs to change, whether it's I need a different view of my work, or maybe we are going to build a brand new team, they're asking the questions of how should we do this? And a lot of times I'll get can you ask the consultant? Which is great, which means that I'm no longer the bad guy, Nick is. But we're going about it in that manner because we want to build something that's scalable and that we all can understand and maintain going forward. So I'd say we're probably like the 80-85% done of the build and then launch. We're hoping to do that here in the next month or so. But more important piece is we have had the conversations and we understand how we should go through these best practices with the software and the service management.
Yeah. Yeah, I like being the bad guy in those conversations, so that's completely fine with me. But it's also empowered you, I think, going through the training, going through this whole process that we've gone through, saying no to things, right? But you've got the understanding of why no is the right answer at times when someone says I need a new project, right? We're not just creating a new project anymore. Awesome. And can you talk a little bit about how the support of leadership, or from a product owner or from a project manager has sort of guided the process that's there today, plus how you see it working better in the future?
Yeah. Our VPs are very important in, getting the buy-in, one, to have agile coaches and to give us support to actually build out in Jira. But what we also did was, for a moment in the beginning, just like we stepped away from ISOs for a moment, we've kind of focused all the effort on the POs and the PMs. And they're the ones that deal with the teams. They're in stand-ups every day. We've really given them the voice and the leadership to be able to ask the right questions and go challenge these norms of why we need a new project or why we need to make a change to a status type or a field. So kind of unifying that group within our organization has really made a lot of sense and kind of streamlines the work that we need to do down to ISOs. But it's been a really big change in how we think about it. It's got leadership support, but this core smaller middle group that really leads the change. And then the development, the ops, the QA, all of those teammates then provide feedback. And so we've kind of got this really nice back and forth now.
Yeah, and there's now more want to utilize some of the tooling that Atlassian has that you guys aren't using
Correct.
currently, right? So there are things being used. It's small. You guys were using Trello, right? And I think we talked about there are still some teams using Trello, and maybe you're going to transition them into Jira if it suits, right?
Yep.
There's a natural progression there from outgrowing Trello to being in a software project, right?
Definitely.
So Jira software, Confluence, Bitbucket, Jira Service Management. These are all things you guys were using. Are going to obviously continue to use. But one of the interesting things, if you want to take a minute or two, can you talk about Jira Product Discovery and Atlas and how we sort of have and are weaving those two things into your processes?
Yeah, definitely. We talk about, the JSM intake. That was something that we knew we would get things, to your earlier point, that weren't fully built out, right? We didn't understand exactly what the work was, how we needed to do it, but it was still being dumped into a software project at that point, which really created this issue of nobody knew, should we work on it today? Should we work on it next week? And so when we found product discovery, this became our favorite home to really take those intakes and say, all right, now this is the PO's job to sit on this ticket, to get buy-in, to do technical discovery, and really understand what it takes to put it into a delivery team's project. So that's something we've been doing for probably 2 to 3 months now. It's been very helpful. Like I said, it's keeping the clutter out of the backlogs of the software projects and allowing us to really ask the right questions. We've built templates and understand what needs to come out of discovery, what the responsibility of the product owner really is in that process, so that we're not giving tickets to developers that aren't ready to be worked.
Yeah, what's super interesting about it, so some portal submissions are going right to the backlog, like we've mentioned multiple times, but you don't want ideas just muddying up your backlog or sitting there for 6 months or whatever, right? And you don't want them necessarily sitting in a queue to be triaged, because it's not necessarily someone who's managing a service management queue to go through ideas and triage ideas. So just a simple automation rule takes an idea that's submitted through the portal and creates it as an idea in a Jira Product Discovery project, right? So you're linking the JSM with Jira Product Discovery, and then once you're in Jira Product Discovery, it's very easy to create a development item in the project that you want, right? Okay. How's that working?
Yeah, it's really awesome. I think, we look at product discovery as the leading phase to the business. When they ask for something, they're not going to understand why we take something into an epic and break it down into stories and subtasks. They just want to know, when's this going to be done? And so the fact that you can link the delivery tickets straight to product discovery really gives them that full view of, I submitted an idea, I can see that the PO did their work on understanding what I needed, and then it turns into 3 epics and 27 stories or something. So we also take that into Atlas, which is one of my favorite yet simplest tools, because we had a PowerPoint deck of probably 50, 60 slides that our leadership wanted updated every week. It took a lot of time, and I understood why they needed it, but we were like, we're already over here in Jira, we're making progress on these tickets and in through discovery. Why can't we just have something in the Atlassian group? And so that's what we found out of Atlas to be this kind of thread where we can just go through what happened last week and really give quick updates to our leadership group. If there's something that didn't have an update, they'll question us on that. But Atlas also says that. It tells us, hey, you haven't updated this project in 3 weeks. Give leadership a group announcement of what's going on. So the two together really kept things clean and kept our leadership team up to date without them having to kind of dig through our software projects to understand where stuff's at.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so I think we already probably talked about next steps. So I don't know that we need to harp on this anymore, but there is still a good amount of work to do. There's, you guys are just diving into Jira product discovery, so probably more to come there. Atlas as well, sort of dipping your toe into that, right? But it's pretty simple to use, and it very easily replaces a slide deck, a very clunky slide deck. And like you mentioned, we're probably a month or two down the road from cutting over all of those projects into their new projects with the consolidated scheming and custom fields and things like that. So any other next steps that I think we haven't touched on yet?
No, those are really the big ones. I think we'll see when we do the cutover. We'll probably have a few more things to adjust and make work. But as a part of this, we've been trying to document all the changes that we've been doing in Confluence. And so these teams, as they get onboarded with new developers or new project managers, they understand their own setup. They understand why it was built a certain way, what they have custom ability to change and what they don't. So hopefully we're heading in an area where we can be more flexible, but also maintain long-term.
That's a good point. You've got buy-in now from those teams that you had those conversations with, right? So any future change will go through the same scrutiny, and they'll now understand that.
They'll submit a form for it.
They'll submit a form for it, yeah. And quite honestly, the biggest next step for this is not really anything that needs to be done, but what you gain from this is much better reporting, right? So all those custom fields are consistent. The statuses are going to be more or less, or they will be more consistent. So your queries can be a lot tighter and probably easier to put together to figure out what, pull the data you want to report on, right?
Yep, definitely.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming. ISO's Technology has a booth. Come visit us. We're giving away a vacation. We've got a dice game going on. So come stop by our booth, booth number 37. But we also do want to open it up for questions. We've got, I think, around 10 minutes left, maybe. We have a few people running around with mics, so just raise your hand.
Thanks so much for taking the time to cover this. It was great. Jonathan over here. Just real quick question. Were you leveraging or will you be leveraging analytics at all? You mentioned reporting a moment ago and how you were able to streamline some of that.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, we were just talking about that this
you want to take that? Yeah.
We're not, I would say, at that level. Like, we're not to the advanced roadmap planning to really get into that, but we are going to start building out more like reports and dashboards just at the software level to see that. I think what I've learned from being here this week is like we've got a ways to go before we really could utilize the level of something like Atlassian analytics, but we're going to start small.
Yeah, and I think from the Atlassian analytics side and where you guys are in your journey with the Atlassian stack, maybe once more teams get in, and then that's sort of the next step, right, is getting more teams in. Maybe that enterprise model comes into play where then Atlassian analytics comes into play.
What are you guys currently doing for like ITSM, and what are your plans for that in terms of all those processes?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
ITSM.
Yeah.
What are you guys currently doing? I know GSM is part of that, but the ITM specific processes like incident management and change management.
Yeah, so currently you guys still have a multitude of different SaaS solutions out there, right?
Yep.
I think JSM, in terms of the team that you're using it for, is using it for intake of ideas or requests, changes to a website or something like that, right? from an incident management perspective, change management perspective, the other ITSM pieces that can be done in the Atlassian stack, those are not currently being done inside Jira, right?
Yeah, so we're using it for production issue of our websites, but we're not really using it full incident for the company. I do think this engagement has really brought and opened eyes that we could use it versus some of our other tools. So again, we're a small department within the overall org, but we're showing a lot of success, and we kind of hope to draw that into some of the bigger teams that need to do the incident reporting.
That's my job to make it happen. So
Yeah.
I'll check back with you later. We'll see. But yeah, I think that's, when you think about all those different areas, you guys are currently using it for one thing. Maybe another team is using another tool for change or incident. A big theme of this conference that we've been hearing about is that consolidation of SaaS providers, right? Most teams, most companies are heavily entrenched in Jira. And it's easier to bring in those other processes inside the Atlassian stack as opposed to finding another solution or using an outside solution for those things. So, but again, my job, I'll see if I can convince him. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you comment on the impact to your support services team? In other words, have you shifted from Jira admins to engineers? And what is your long-term strategy? How long is ISIS going to be with your team?
Yeah, I would say the impact of the support team has been, for our specific team is really kind of the ops side of our house that runs, the websites along with a lot of other pieces, but they have a single point now. So they're really looking at a single space where all of these incident requests come in. And again, we're trying to take that use case and build it into, say, corporate IT and where that stuff can come in. From a long-term standpoint, I think, our engagement was very scope focused with ISOs on fix, break, audit stuff. And I think we've learned, one, that the tool set that they're best at has got a lot more roadmap for us. So we already see future stage. I think having a partner also takes some of that structure off. We don't have to have our ops teams, our developers be the experts in the tool anymore. That's not where we see the most benefit for their work. And that's where we can have a partner like ISOs do a lot of it.
Well, and you've got a day job aside from running the Atlassian stack,
Yeah.
right? And so the streamlining, the consolidation, that should, and I think it has equaled less requests coming to you to get done, right? You now own this after going through this process and determining that there were way too many hands in the pot, and that you lost knowledge around how things were built. It all fell on you,
Yep.
right? And so that was one of the drivers for bringing us in. And I think eventually that goes away, right? You're going to feel more confident administering the tools. We'll get things set up in a way where there's not daily support that's needed from us or something like that, right? But like we mentioned, the next steps for Crocs, your question about incident management, change management, those are all future things that, again, my job to get out of this guy. So any other questions?
I'll ask a question. What was the timeline for everything that you talked about? This whole process of coming to ISOs, audit, agile transformation. You're going to launch in a couple months. Like, what is that overall? How much time did this take?
I'll start and then let you go.
All right.
If you'd asked me, so the project was probably initially scoped for 2 or 3 months, right? I think very quickly we realized within the first 3 or 4 weeks that was just not going to happen. So how long have we been sort of going?
Yeah, I think we're probably in like the 9-10 month range right now. I think the majority of our time spent has been on the process and internal with people and agile. The work of the tooling isn't necessarily that difficult, but it can be when you're kind of fighting against the grain with other teams. So overall, from leadership buying into saying we're going to do these changes, whether it's the tooling or agile, to now we're probably at about 10 months, and yeah, hopefully 1 or 2 more.
Yeah, and it's not as if I've been hands on keyboard that whole time, right? Like you mentioned, there's a lot of stop and go. But I think had you guys attempted to audit and clean up and start these conversations without engaging us, and maybe it would have gone fine, but having a partner or a tool expert in there first lent a lot of credibility to those conversations that you eventually had, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think we would have probably come back and had more scope and more statement of work to really keep doing, because we would have been hitting a lot of the same walls very quickly. So it was worth the back and forth time, but yeah, definitely added to the overall timeline.
Yeah. So, when you have to take away and have those conversations internally, I don't think any conversation with a VP or a C-suite is going to take anything less than probably 2 or 3 months to come to a decision on, right? So we fully understood that we needed to step back, take a little pause, and, yeah, we're coming on close to a year now for the project.